the grand tapestry of human belief, woven through millennia with threads of faith, hope, and mystery, there are certain objects that seem to possess a light of their own. They are not merely artifacts of a bygone era. They are focal points of power, anchors of faith, and keys to understanding the very nature of the divine. We have pursued their legends across continents, deciphered their secrets in forgotten languages, and felt their pull on our collective soul. Yet, among all these hallowed relics, one stands alone, not on a pedestal of history, but on a throne of awe and terror. It was not just a symbol of God's promise, it was said to be his very footstool on earth, a conduit of power so absolute that to gaze upon it unbidden was to invite annihilation. This is the story of the most sought after, most enigmatic, and most profoundly lost object in all of human history. This is the story of the Ark of the Covenant. Welcome to the Bible Weaver, where we trace the intricate threads of scripture and history to uncover the profound stories that have shaped our world. If you are a seeker of forgotten knowledge and a lover of sacred mysteries, I invite you to subscribe and join our fellowship of weavers, as today we embark on a journey into the heart of a divine enigma, chasing the golden echo of a vanished throne. Our story does not begin in the treasury of a king or the sanctum of a temple. It begins in a place of nothingness, in the vast and terrible beauty of the desert. Imagine the Sinai wilderness, a landscape forged by a sun that shows no mercy, where mountains of black, jagged rock tear at a sky of impossible blue. It is a world of stark realities where life clings to existence by a thread. This is not merely a geographic location. It is a crucible. It is an anvil upon which a new people are being hammered into shape. They are a nation of escaped slaves, the children of Israel, carrying the memory of Egyptian bondage like a phantom weight on their shoulders. They are unmoored, caught in a liminal space between a past they have fled and a future they cannot yet comprehend. Their guide through this desolate expanse is a man himself caught between two worlds, the prophet Moses, raised in the gilded halls of Pharaoh's court, now the reluctant shepherd of 1,000,000 souls. His only compass is the voice of a God who is invisible, intangible, and utterly unlike any deity the ancient world had ever known. This God of Israel was not a statue of stone or a graven image of gold. He had no physical form, no temple, no fixed address. For a people accustomed to the tangible gods of Egypt, this was a profound challenge. How do you worship a God you cannot see? How do you follow a king who has no palace? It is this fundamental tension, this human need for a tangible connection to the divine, that sets the stage for the creation of the Ark. The divine summons Moses to the summit of Mount Sinai. The mountain itself is transformed into a stage for a cosmic drama. The Bible paints a scene of terrifying majesty. The peak is wreathed in a thick dark cloud, a storm of divine energy that crackles and seethes. Flashes of lightning illuminate the scene with a ghostly strobing light, and the ground shudders with deep, resonant tremors. The air itself seems to vibrate with a sound, a piercing celestial blast like a great ram's horn, the shofar that grows in intensity until it seems it will shatter the very stones of the mountain. Below, the Israelite camp is paralyzed with a holy fear. They are witnessing a theophany, a direct manifestation of divine power, and it is overwhelming. Into this vortex of fire and sound, Moses ascends alone. For 40 days and 40 nights he remains on the mountain, enveloped in the cloud of God's glory, a mortal mortal man conversing with the infinite. When he descends, he carries 2 tablets of stone, inscribed with the 10 commandments, the moral architecture for his people. But he carries more than just laws. He carries a second blueprint, a set of instructions of breathtaking precision. He is commanded to build a home for this covenant, not a temple of stone, for they are a people on the move. He is to build a portable throne, a movable sanctuary, an object that will serve as the focal point of God's presence on earth. He is given the divine architecture for the Ark of the Covenant. The instructions Moses received were not vague suggestions. They were a sacred formula, a piece of divine engineering where every material, every measurement, every detail was saturated with symbolic meaning. This was to be a physical object that would teach us spiritual truth. The foundation of the ark was to be acacia wood, or shittim wood as it is called in the Hebrew text. This was not a wood chosen for its beauty like cedar or cypress. The acacia is a tree of the desert, gnarled and thorny. Its wood dense, hardy, and famously resistant to rot and insects. It speaks of endurance, of life persisting in the harshest of conditions. In the symbolic language of the tabernacle, the wood represented that which was earthly, mortal, and yet resilient, humanity itself. But this humble, mortal foundation was not to remain visible. It was to be completely encased, inside and out, in a sheath of pure gold. Gold, the most precious and incorruptible of metals, which does not tarnish or decay, represented the very nature of God, pure, eternal, holy, and divine. The fusion of these 2 materials was the central metaphor of the ark. It was the meeting of heaven and earth, the binding of the divine to the human, a physical representation of the covenant itself. The dimensions were specified with the precision of an architect: 2.5 cubits in length, 1.5 cubits in width, and 1.5 in height. In an ancient world that saw divine order in mathematics, these were not random numbers. They were part of a system of sacred geometry that would resonate throughout the entire tabernacle structure. At the 4 feet of this golden chest, 4 rings of pure gold were to be cast. Through these rings, 2 long poles, also fashioned from acacia wood and overlaid with gold, were to be inserted. And a crucial, seemingly strange command was given. These poles were never to be removed. They were to remain permanently in the rings. The ark was to be in a perpetual state of readiness for travel. This was a profound theological statement. The God of Israel was not a localized deity confined to a mountain or a city. His presence was dynamic, mobile, ready to journey with his people wherever they went. He was a God of the road, a God of the wilderness, a constant companion in their pilgrimage. To execute this sacred design, 2 men were specifically chosen by divine appointment: Bezalel of the tribe of Judah and his assistant Oholiab of the tribe of Dan. The scripture says they were filled with the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God, which gifted them with an almost supernatural level of wisdom, understanding and skill in all forms of craftsmanship. Imagine these 2 men, their faces lit by the orange glow of a forge fire under a canopy of desert stars. Their workshop, a simple tent in the midst of the sprawling camp, becomes a sacred space. Every strike of the hammer, every cut of the saw is an act of worship. They are not merely following a blueprint, they are channeling a divine artistic vision. We can envision them selecting the perfect acacia planks, their hands feeling the dense grain, honoring the life of the desert tree. We see them melting the gold donated by the people, a river of liquid sun, and then painstakingly hammering it into vast, impossibly thin sheets. They apply this golden skin to the wooden frame with meticulous care, burnishing it until the surface gleams with a flawless, otherworldly light, until every trace of the mortal wood is hidden beneath the glory of the divine gold. Yet, the most significant and awe-inspiring part of the ark was its lid, and it was not merely a lid. It was called the captivated, a Hebrew word often translated as the mercy seat. It was to be fashioned from a single solid piece of pure gold, and from this same solid piece, not attached later but raised up from the very metal itself, through the masterful art of the goldsmith, 2 golden figures were to be formed at either end. These were the cherubim. It is vital to erase from our minds the modern, popular image of cherubs as chubby, infant-like angels. This is a corruption of the original concept, a product of Renaissance art. The cherubim of the ancient Near East, as described in texts from across the Fertile Crescent, were majestic, terrifying and powerful beings. They were hybrid creatures, often combining the features of a human, a lion, an ox and an eagle, representing the pinnacle of intelligence, strength, service and sovereignty in the created world. They were not messengers, but guardians of the sacred beings, who stood in the immediate presence of God, shielding his holiness from the profane. The 2 cherubim on the mercy seat were to face each other, their heads bowed in reverence towards the golden slab beneath them. Their great golden wings were to stretch upwards and forwards, their tips meeting in the middle to form a protective arch, a canopy of celestial guardianship. And it was here, in the empty space defined by the bowed heads and the arching wings of the cherubim, that the entire purpose of the ark was concentrated. For God's promise to Moses was explicit: "There I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim which are on the ark of the testimony, I will speak to you." This was not just a beautiful box. It was to be a communications device, a point of contact, an intersection between the realm of the eternal and the world of time and space. When the work was finished and the stone tablets of the covenant were placed inside, the scripture tells us that a pillar of cloud, the physical manifestation of God's glory, the Shekinah, descended and filled the tabernacle with a light so intense, so overwhelmingly holy, that even Moses himself could not enter. The ark was complete. God had taken up his residence among his people. For 40 years of wandering in the desert, the ark remained the sacred, silent heart of the Israelite nation. It was housed in the innermost chamber of the tabernacle, veiled from all sight, its presence a constant reminder of the covenant that defined them. But as that generation passed away and a new generation stood poised on the brink of the promised land, the ark began to reveal another of its attributes. It was not merely a passive throne of presence and communication. It was also an active instrument of immense power, a vanguard that could suspend the laws of nature and act as a weapon of divine will. Their first great obstacle was the Jordan River. It was the spring season, and the river was a raging, impassable torrent, swollen with snowmelt from the northern mountains. It was the final barrier between their wilderness past and their promised future. No army could ford such a river, but their path was not to be cleared by human engineering. The command was given by their new leader, Joshua. The priests of the Levite clan, the designated bearers, stepped forward. Imagine the weight on their shoulders, not just of the golden ark, but of the nation's hope. They walk towards the churning water's edge, a procession of faith moving towards an impossible barrier. The moment the soles of their feet dipped into the river, the impossible happened. The Bible describes it with a strange, geological precision. The waters flowing downstream towards the Dead Sea continued on their way, while the waters coming from upstream rose up in a heap, piling upon themselves as if held back by an invisible dam. A wide corridor of dry land was cleaved through the heart of the river. The entire nation of Israel, hundreds of thousands of people with their livestock and belongings, walked across the riverbed on dry ground. In the very center of the passage, the priests stood holding the ark, a silent, golden anchor holding back the liquid walls until every last person had safely crossed. This power over the natural world would soon be directed against the works of man. Their first military objective in Canaan was the city of Jericho, a fortress of legendary antiquity and strength. Its massive double walls were the pinnacle of ancient defensive architecture. A conventional siege would be a long, bloody, and uncertain affair. But the battle plan they were given was one of the strangest in the annals of warfare. It was a strategy of ritual, patience, and sound. For 6 consecutive days, the Israelite army, in full battle array, was to march around the city one time. But they were to march in absolute, unnerving silence. No war cries, no clashing of swords, no taunts. The only sound was the tread of thousands of soldiers in the dust, and the cyclical, mournful blast of 7 shofars, rams' horns, carried by 7 priests. And leading this bizarre, silent parade was the Ark of the Covenant, carried aloft on the shoulders of the Levites. Consider the psychological impact on the defenders of Jericho, peering down from their ramparts. Day after day, this silent army, led by a gleaming golden box, circled their home. This was not the familiar cadence of war. It was something deeply unsettling, a supernatural siege. The tension must have built with each rotation, a slow, tightening coil of dread. On the 7th day, the ritual changed. They did not circle once, but 7 times. As the 7th circuit was completed, the 7 priests raised their horns and blew a single long, coordinated blast. At that signal, Joshua gave the command, and the Israelite army, silent for so long, unleashed a single titanic shout, a primal roar of collective faith that rolled across the plain and struck the city. And in that moment, the impregnable walls of Jericho crumbled. The text says they fell down flat, not breached in one place, but utterly collapsing into a heap of rubble around the entire perimeter of the city. The ark had not fired a single projectile, but its presence, amplified by the faith of the people, had unmade the city's foundations. Yet this awesome power was volatile, its sanctity a lethal energy that demanded absolute reverence. Even an act of well-intentioned care could be fatal. The story of Uzzah is a stark and chilling illustration. Years later, when King David was finally bringing the ark to its new home in Jerusalem, there was a great, joyful procession. But they made a mistake. Instead of having the Levites carry it on its poles as commanded, they placed it on a new ox cart. During the journey, the oxen stumbled and the cart tilted precariously. A man named Uzzah, who was walking alongside, instinctively reached out his hand to steady the ark and prevent it from falling. The instant his flesh made contact with the sacred object, he was struck dead. The celebration turned to horror and confusion. It seems a cruel act, but It was a brutal lesson in the nature of divine holiness. It was not a tame or sentimental force. It was an absolute, like a point of cosmic high voltage. Uzzah's touch, though well-meaning, was an unauthorized breach of a sacred circuit, and the result was instantaneous and lethal. Even Israel's enemies, the formidable Philistines, would learn to fear the power they could not comprehend. In a devastating military defeat for Israel, the Ark was captured in battle. It was the ultimate humiliation, as if their God himself had been taken prisoner. The Philistines treated it as a supreme trophy of war. They carried it in triumph to their city of Ashdod and placed it in the temple of their chief god Dagon, setting it beside his large statue as a symbol of Dagon's victory. The next morning, the priests of Dagon entered the temple to find their god's statue had fallen from its pedestal and was lying prostrate on its face before the ark. They laboriously set the heavy statue back in its place. But the following morning, they found it not only fallen again, but grotesquely mutilated. The statue's head and both of its hands had been broken off and were lying on the threshold of the temple, leaving only the torso. The humiliation of their god was only the beginning. A terrible plague broke out in Ashdod. The biblical account speaks of tumors and a scourge of mice, likely a form of bubonic plague. The city was gripped by panic and death. The Philistine lords, realizing the Ark was the source, moved it to another city, Gath. The plague immediately broke out in Gath. They moved it again to Ekron, and the people of Ekron cried out in terror, knowing death would follow. The Ark was no longer a trophy. It was a divine weapon turned against them. After 7 months of torment, the terrified Philistine leaders devised a plan to rid themselves of this holy terror. They constructed a new cart, placed the ark upon it, along with a guilt offering of golden tumors and golden mice. They then took 2 nursing cows that had never been yoked, separated them from their calves, an act that would naturally make them return home, and hitched them to the cart. Without a driver, they sent it on its way, a test to see if the plague was truly from the God of Israel. The cows, against all instinct, ignored their crying calves and walked in a straight line, without turning left or right, directly back to Israelite territory. The Philistines had learned a lesson that would be passed down for generations. The God of Israel was not a God to be trifled with, and his throne was not an object to be possessed. After its tumultuous early history as a wandering sanctuary and a weapon of war, the time finally came for the Ark of the Covenant to find a permanent home. King David, the poet-warrior who had united the kingdom, brought the Ark to his chosen capital, Jerusalem, and housed it in a temporary tent, transforming the city into the religious and political heart of the nation. But it was his son, Solomon, whose name would become synonymous with wisdom and splendor, who would undertake the monumental task of building a permanent dwelling for the God of Israel. The construction of the first temple was an enterprise that would become legendary, a wonder of the ancient world. It was not merely a building, it was a statement in stone and gold, a physical embodiment of a nation's devotion. For 7 years, the resources of the kingdom were marshaled. Solomon made a treaty with Hiram, the Phoenician king of Tyre, to supply vast quantities of fragrant cedar wood from the famed forests of Lebanon. These giant logs were floated down the Mediterranean coast and then hauled overland to Jerusalem. Massive, perfect blocks of white limestone were hewn from quarries deep beneath the city. each one cut and dressed with such precision at the quarry site that the temple itself rose in an almost preternatural silence, without the sound of hammers, chisels, or any iron tool. The design of the temple mirrored the design of the tabernacle, but on a far grander and more permanent scale. It was a structure of ascending holiness. Worshippers would enter through outer courts, moving progressively inward, closer to the center of sanctity. At the heart of the complex stood the main temple building. Its interior was a symphony of craftsmanship. The stone walls were completely panelled with cedar, so that no stone was visible. The floors were laid with planks of cypress. And then, nearly every interior surface, the walls, the floors, the ceilings, the ornate carvings of cherubim, palm trees and blooming flowers that adorned the walls, was overlaid with pure gold. The effect must have been breathtaking, a dazzling golden space that shimmered in the light from the temple's high windows, and the glow of its 10 massive golden lampstands. This main hall was known as the Holy Place, but behind it, separated by a partition of cedar wood with great folding doors of olive wood, and veiled by a magnificent curtain of blue, purple, crimson and fine linen, lay the final chamber. This was the spiritual heart of the universe for the Israelites. It was a perfect cube, 20 cubits in length, width and height. It had no windows and was shrouded in absolute, perpetual darkness. It was called the Debir, the Oracle, but it is known to history as the Holy of Holies. This was to be the final resting place of the Ark, the Sanctum Sanctorum, but Solomon had prepared the chamber for its arrival. Inside this dark golden cube, he had commissioned 2 new colossal cherubim. These were not the small integrated figures on the mercy seat. These were gigantic statues, each standing 15 feet tall, carved from fine olive wood and, like everything else, overlaid with pure gold. They were positioned side by side in the center of the room, each with 2 great wings. Their inner wings, each stretching 7.5 feet, met in the exact center of the room, directly above where the ark would be placed. Their outer wings stretched to touch the northern and southern walls of the chamber. Together they formed a vast protective golden canopy that spanned the entire width of the Holy of Holies. When the temple was finally completed and consecrated, a great ceremony took place. The priests lifted the Ark of the Covenant on its ancient golden poles for the last time. As Solomon led the nation in a prayer of dedication, the priests carried the Ark through the temple, behind the great veil, and into the silent darkness of the inner sanctum. They placed it on the floor, directly beneath the meeting point of the giant cherubim's wings. The Ark, which had journeyed for so long, had finally come to rest. As the priests withdrew from the chamber, the scripture records that the Shekinah, the visible glory of the Lord, descended as a thick cloud and filled the entire temple with a divine radiance so powerful that the priests could not even stand to perform their duties. God had accepted the house built for him. For nearly 400 years, the Ark of the Covenant remained in that silent, golden darkness. It became the still point of the turning world for Israel. The world outside the temple walls was a maelstrom of history. Empires rose and fell. Dynasties of kings came and went. The nation itself experienced periods of faithfulness and apostasy. But in the heart of the temple, in a chamber no human eye was ever meant to see, the Ark rested. The only exception was on one day of the year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. On that day, and that day only the high priest, after undergoing elaborate rituals of purification, would pass through the veil. He would carry a censer filled with burning coals and incense, creating a thick cloud of smoke to obscure his vision, lest he gaze directly upon the mercy seat and die. In the darkness he would sprinkle the blood of a sacrificed animal upon the mercy seat, making atonement for the sins of the entire nation. For 4 centuries this was the central ritual of the faith, the sacred anchor of their covenant. And then, from the historical record, it vanishes. It disappears so completely that it seems to have simply evaporated from the pages of history, leaving behind a silence that has echoed for 25 centuries. The golden age of Solomon was a brilliant but fleeting moment. After his death, the unified kingdom of Israel was torn in 2. The 10 northern tribes formed their own kingdom, which, after centuries of political instability and idolatry, was eventually conquered and assimilated by the mighty Assyrian Empire. Its people scattered and lost to history. The southern kingdom, known as Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital and the temple as its heart, endured. But it was a kingdom in a state of slow, painful decline. Many of its kings forsook the covenant of Moses, building altars to foreign gods and allowing pagan practices to flourish, sometimes even within the courts of the temple itself. Through this long twilight, great prophetic figures arose, men like Isaiah and Micah, and later the tragic figure of Jeremiah. They were voices crying in the wilderness of a corrupt society, calling the kings and the people back to the covenant, warning them of a coming judgment if they did not repent. They spoke of a new, ruthless superpower rising in the east, a hammer of the nations that God would use as his instrument of chastisement. That empire was Neo-Babylonia, and its king was the formidable and ambitious Nebuchadnezzar II. The warnings of the prophets went largely unheeded. The kingdom of Judah, weakened by internal corruption and caught in the great geopolitical struggles between Egypt and Babylon, stumbled towards its doom. The storm finally broke in the year 587 BC. After a brutal 18-month siege that reduced the inhabitants of Jerusalem to starvation and cannibalism, Nebuchadnezzar's armies breached the city's formidable walls. The aftermath was a scene of apocalyptic destruction. The city was systematically plundered. The king's palace, the houses of the nobles, the humble dwellings of the common people, all were put to the torch. Jerusalem was to be erased as a political entity. The crowning act of this destruction was the methodical annihilation of Solomon's temple. The Babylonian soldiers, for whom the temple was just another treasury of a conquered foe, swarmed its sacred courts. The 2 colossal bronze pillars that stood at the entrance were broken into pieces for easier transport. The great bronze basin called the Sea, which rested on the backs of 12 bronze oxen, was shattered. The sacred vessels, the altars, the golden lampstands, the silver bowls, the fire pans, every object of ceremonial and material value was seized. Then the Babylonian soldiers set fire to the magnificent structure. The great cedar beams overlaid with gold collapsed in a shower of sparks. The stones, quarried and set in silence, now cracked and fell in the roaring heat. The house of God on earth became a smoking ruin. In the final chapter of the 2nd book of Kings, and again in the book of Jeremiah, the Bible provides a remarkably detailed, almost clinical inventory of the treasures that Nebuzaradan, the captain of Nebuchadnezzar's guard, looted from the temple and carried away to Babylon. It is a conqueror's ledger, an accountant's list of spoils. It catalogues the bronze, the silver and the gold. It lists pillars, basins, pots, shovels, snuffers and spoons. It is meticulous in its detail, and it is in this very meticulousness that we find the heart of our mystery. For in this detailed list of plundered items, great and small, the single most important, most sacred, most valuable and most powerful object in the entire temple is inexplicably absent. The Ark of the Covenant is not mentioned, not a word. Its golden cherubim are not listed. Its acacia wood frame is not accounted for. The mercy seat is gone. In the final, fiery moments of the first temple, its very heart seems to have vanished without a trace. This deafening silence in the biblical record is the starting point of a quest that has captivated theologians, historians, adventurers and mystics for over 2.5 millennia. As the flames consumed Jerusalem, where was the Ark? This profound absence on the page of history has since been filled by the ink of legend, theory, and fervent faith. Over the centuries, a number of compelling narratives have emerged, each seeking to explain the fate of the vanished Ark. They range from the deeply theological to the pragmatically historical, from the heart of Jerusalem to the highlands of Africa. The first, and within traditional Judaism the most prominent theory, is that the Ark was never taken from Jerusalem at all. It was hidden. This belief stems from the idea that the destruction of the temple was not a surprise, but a long prophesied event. Prophets like Jeremiah had been warning of the coming doom for decades. Therefore, the priests of the temple would have had time to prepare. According to ancient rabbinic traditions found in the Talmud, King Solomon himself, with his divine wisdom, foresaw that the great temple he was building would one day be destroyed. And so, as part of its original construction, he commissioned the creation of a complex system of tunnels, vaults, and secret chambers deep in the bedrock of the Temple Mount. This subterranean labyrinth was designed for one specific purpose: to serve as a hiding place for the Ark of the Covenant in a time of extreme national crisis. The tradition holds that as the Babylonian armies closed in on Jerusalem, the high priest, likely acting on the direct instruction of the prophet Jeremiah, commanded a group of Levites to carry the Ark down into these secret passages. They would have navigated the dark, winding tunnels to a specially prepared chamber, sealing the Ark within, and then obliterating the entrance to the passage. According to this belief, the Ark of the Covenant never left the Temple Mount. It simply descended from the earthly temple into a hidden sanctuary, where it remains to this day, buried deep beneath one of the most contested and holy sites on the planet, waiting for the prophetic age of the Messiah's arrival, when it will be revealed once more. It's a compelling theory, but one that is impossible to verify, as any large-scale archaeological excavation beneath the Temple Mount is politically and religiously unthinkable. The second theory is perhaps the most famous and elaborate, a story so grand it has become the national epic of an entire country. This is the Ethiopian tradition, which states with unshakable certainty that the Ark of the Covenant is not lost at all, but is safely housed in a small chapel in the ancient city of Aksum. This belief is chronicled in their sacred text, the Kebra Nagast, or the Glory of Kings. The story begins 1,000 years before Christ, with the biblical account of the Queen of Sheba's visit to King Solomon in Jerusalem. The Kebra Nagast elaborates on this encounter, telling of a romance between the two monarchs, that resulted in the birth of a son, Menelik. As a young man, Menelik travelled from his home in Ethiopia to Jerusalem to meet the father he had never known. Solomon was overjoyed and recognized him as his firstborn. He lavished Menelik with honors and begged him to stay and rule after him. But Menelik was determined to return to his mother's kingdom. As he prepared to leave, a group of the firstborn sons of the Israelite elders, who were being sent to accompany him, were secretly distraught. They could not bear the thought of leaving Jerusalem and living in a land where the Ark, the very presence of God, was absent. So they devised a daring plan. Without Menelik's knowledge, they constructed a perfect replica of the Ark. On the night before their departure, they entered the Holy of Holies, swapped the forgery for the real Ark, and smuggled the genuine article out of the temple. They took it with them on their long journey south, up the Nile River, through Egypt, and into the highlands of Ethiopia. According to the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, it has remained there ever since. For 3,000 years it has been protected by a lineage of devoted monks. Today it is said to reside in the Chapel of the Tablet, adjacent to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum. No one is permitted to see it. Its secrets are entrusted to a single, elderly monk, the guardian, who is chosen for life, and is never allowed to leave the chapel's sacred grounds. He alone gazes upon the Ark, communicating with it and protecting it, until he names his successor upon his deathbed. It is a story of immense faith and cultural identity, a living tradition that treats the Ark not as a lost object of the past, but a present and potent reality. A third set of theories is more prosaic and grounded in the brutal realities of ancient warfare. The simplest, and to many historians the most plausible, explanation is that the Ark was simply destroyed by the Babylonians. Its absence from the loot list might not be a mystery at all. To the battle-hardened soldiers of Nebuchadnezzar, the Ark would have been just one of many gilded religious objects in a city full of them. They would have had no knowledge of or reverence for its unique sanctity. Standard procedure for such objects was to strip them of their precious metals. They would have broken the Ark apart, peeled off its gold overlay for melting into bullion, and cast the acacia wood frame into the flames that were consuming the rest of the temple. In this scenario, the Ark wasn't lost. It was annihilated, its identity unrecorded, its materials recycled into the Babylonian treasury. A variation on this theme suggests the Ark vanished long before the Babylonians arrived. The Bible, in the book of 1 Kings, records that about 340 years before the final destruction, the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak invaded Judah, marched on Jerusalem, and plundered the treasures of the temple. The list of what he took is vague, simply saying, "the treasures of the house of the Lord." Is it possible that the original Ark of Solomon was taken then? This would imply that the object residing in the Holy of Holies for the subsequent centuries was a replica, revered as the original but lacking its ancient power. This is the theory that famously inspired the film Raiders of the Lost Ark, which imagines the Ark being taken by Shishak to the Egyptian city of Tanis, and then lost in a sandstorm. Finally, there is a fourth theory which comes from a specific, though non-canonical, ancient text. The second book of Maccabees, a Jewish work from the 2nd century BC, provides a detailed account of the Ark's fate. It claims that the prophet Jeremiah, acting on a divine oracle just before the invasion, took charge of the most sacred objects. He commanded that the Ark, along with the original tabernacle tent and the altar of incense, be brought to him. He then led a small group of followers out of Jerusalem and across the Jordan River to Mount Nebo, the very peak from which Moses had been allowed to see the promised land before he died. There the prophet found a cave dwelling, and he carried the sacred items inside and sealed the entrance. When some of his followers who had come to mark the spot returned, they could no longer find it. Jeremiah declared to them that the location was to remain unknown until God gathers his people together again and shows his mercy. Of all the theories, this one provides the most specific details. A named protagonist in Jeremiah, a known location in Mount Nebo, and even a prophetic timeline for its eventual recovery. Treasure hunters and archaeologists have searched the caves of Mount Nebo for centuries, but the prophet's secret, if it exists, remains well kept. Hidden beneath the earth, spirited away to a foreign land, shattered by a conqueror's greed, or sealed in a mountain cave. Each theory is a thread, a potential path leading away from the fiery destruction of Jerusalem. The Ark of the Covenant enters the biblical narrative with the clear, commanding voice of God on a mountain of fire, and it exits in a whisper, a question mark that has haunted the corridors of history ever since. It is the ultimate cold case. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the Ark of the Covenant is not found in its potential location, but in the profound spiritual transformation that was triggered by its absence. For the people of ancient Israel, the presence of God was something tangible, localized, and specific. It resided in a particular city, in a particular building, in a particular room between the wings of two golden cherubim on a golden box. The loss of the Ark and the subsequent destruction of the temple was more than a national and military catastrophe. It was a theological crisis of the highest order. If the throne of God could be captured or destroyed, what did that say about God himself? It was in the crucible of the Babylonian exile, a people far from their promised land, with their temple in ruins and their sacred ark gone, that a new, more profound understanding of God began to emerge. Faith had to evolve from something that could be housed in wood and gold to something that could be carried in the heart and in the mind. The divine presence, once concentrated in the Holy of Holies, was now understood to be accessible everywhere, through prayer, through scripture, and through community. The focus of the religion shifted from a place to a book. The scrolls of the Torah, containing the very laws that were once housed inside the Ark, now became the portable sanctuary, the center of Jewish life. The synagogue, the house of study and prayer, began to replace the temple as the primary institution of the faith. When a second temple was eventually rebuilt in Jerusalem by the returning exiles, its Holy of Holies was different from Solomon's. It was empty. There was no ark. For centuries, the high priest on the Day of Atonement would enter an empty, dark room. This very emptiness became a new and powerful symbol. It spoke of a God who was transcendent, who could not be contained in any house made by human hands, whose presence filled the entire universe. The loss of the Ark forced the faith to mature, to move from a religion of sacred objects to a religion of sacred ideas. And so the quest for the lost Ark of the Covenant continues, a story that still captures the imagination like no other. It is a tale of divine power, of human faith, of the enduring allure of a sacred mystery. But perhaps the disappearance of the Ark was its final and most profound miracle. It was a lesson written in absence. It taught the world that what is truly holy cannot be owned, cannot be contained, and can therefore never truly be lost. The golden throne may be gone forever, but the search for the divine presence it once represented, the search for meaning, for connection, for the whisper of God in the wilderness of the world, that is a search that continues in every generation, in the heart of all humanity. Thank you for joining me on this journey at the Bible Weaver. The fate of the Ark remains one of history's most compelling open questions. Which theory do you find most convincing? Is it hidden? Is it in Ethiopia? Or was it lost to the ravages of time? Weave your own thoughts into the conversation in the comments section below. If you found this exploration to be a valuable thread in your own tapestry of knowledge, please show your support by giving this video a like, sharing it with fellow seekers, and most importantly, by subscribing to the Bible Weaver and ringing the notification bell. In doing so, you ensure that you will not miss our next endeavor to unravel the sacred stories of the ages. Until next time, may your own search for understanding be ever fruitful